In this week's pod, we were joined by Lawrence Rowland to discuss ChatGPT Plus for businesses. Lawrence helps companies to apply AI to practical projects, use cases, and not get left behind. Why can't I say that? He has an engineering projects portfolio consulting background, having worked at MOTS, WSP, Bechtel, Booz Allen, CPC, and P Cubed, working across infrastructure, transport, government, energy, and manufacturing sectors.
He's just an enthusiastic amateur when it comes to AI, teaching himself since 2017, which proves anyone can do it. He lives in the UK and walks hills and reads novels in his spare time. He posts a Project AI prompt daily on LinkedIn, so do go and check that one out, folks. But we had a fantastic conversation in this episode with Lawrence. Martin, what are some of the key takeaways for you?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I learned so much about it. I actually learned what GPT stands for, Generative Pre-training Transformer. Yeah, he talked through some of the differences. ChatGPT, what you actually get when you pay for it. It's really good. Some interesting topics that we talked about, particularly around communication on projects. Actually, quite enjoyed the conversation, worth listening. But how about you, Val? What were your main takeaways?
Oh, look, the whole episode for me is fantastic because, this isn't just about awareness, it's about the live application, his approach to use cases for specific project challenges. And I think that's where it's really interesting, because what we said on the pod was that a lot of people aren't actually applying or using GPT daily. And this actually helps people get access and a bit of a sandpit so everyone can try without really having too much impact to their day-to-day. But I thought it was great. Lawrence is a great guy, and honestly, it was great to have him and look forward to having him back.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Val. There was so much more we could speak about, but we'll save that for part 2 when we get him back. There is a fantastic thought he leaves everyone with at the end, but I'm not going to spoil it and mention it here. We'll leave it there, folks. As we say, keep listening, keep liking, and keep paying it forward.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's 2024. Can't believe we made it through another year. It's good to see you, Dale and Martin, joining me in the new year. How are you guys? How was your holiday off?
Yeah, I think the new year's good, Val. It's an interesting start to the year. I think it's quiet for some, busy on the other respects, but Project Chatter never sleeps, I don't think. Martin, do you sleep?
No, only after a few beers.
Which is
Happy New Year to you both.
Thanks, it's good to see you again. And look, I think we kicking off with the right topic and subject matter, just because the press release from this morning for ChatGPT OpenAI was that the marketplace will go live next week, which is pretty exciting. I think it'll crash, but anyway, that's my excitement for the year. And our guest today, before introductions, has been someone I've been following for a while as well. I think Dale, you as well as people who are interesting and curious about the same things we are. And we kind of mentioned this in the last episode when we did the horizon scanning about what's possible. Now, Lawrence Rowland, welcome to the show, mate. This is your first time here. It's good to see you and meet you face to face.
Thanks, Val. Thanks, Dale and Martin. Nice to meet you all.
Now, you've been pretty interesting in my radar, only because you and I think, share a similar obsession maybe with what is possible with the ChatGPT process and where it's kind of evolved over the last year. And I think people like us, I think this early adoption piece has been a fun sandpit, because for the first time, without a lot of technical knowledge, I think from a coding perspective or a software perspective, you're able to apply your experience from projects in an environment where you're not going to damage anything, but you can see the instant results and those instantaneous results. Now, I think before we get into the geeky land of lawrenceandval.com, we need to kind of set the stage for some of the listeners around what is ChatGPT and what is a GPT. Because I think when I speak to some of the clients and people around the project space, they haven't quite discerned the difference between what is the ChatGPT engine itself, ChatGPT 4 now is out, and what is this GPT environment piece. Do you want to give me your version of that, Lawrence? And I'm happy to provide a bit as well if that helps. But I would love to know, how do you explain it to people when you're talking at dinner over Christmas?
I managed to avoid that at Christmas, but yeah, thanks, Val. Yeah, I think it's quite straightforward. So I think if you think about large language models, I think everyone's been talking about that for the year, of which ChatGPT is the example we'll start on for now. I think that GPTs are just a brand name for basically bundling up a set of prompts, if you like, so that someone else, or so that you at a future date can actually go back to that kind of conversation set and run through a series of tasks. So it's really the same thing under the hood, but it's just, if you like, a user interface that allows you, accelerates you into a particular domain and a particular use case.
Yeah, awesome. And so for those that still don't know what we're talking about, there is plenty of information online, but the GPTs itself is a low code or no code environment that you can have a lot of fun in. And I think, Lawrence, just getting past the kind of the initial courtesies of how'd you get involved in this, what sparked you to get involved directly into these GPTs specifically for your project learning experience?
Yeah, so I was already basically using ChatGPT every day. So basically, when the GPTs came out, I realized that basically it's just an easier way of communicating and helping other people to get on board. And therefore, and I had all those prompts previously, so it's just a question of then jumping onto that, because essentially, what if you listen to the way that OpenAI presented these in their dev day, then you can see that what they're thinking of is this is essentially a proto agent framework. So these are, like, if you like, early agents which can take actions in the world, but obviously none of us are used to that, and we're all a bit scared of it. And so they've introduced these kind of early creatures, if you like, that are GPTs, so that we can get comfortable with it, and so that we can start to flush out some of the bugs. So for me, it was a no-brainer to sort of move straight across the GPTs to show people, just like with one or two lines, if you've already got a series of custom instructions ready to go, then you could take someone through a series of tasks or a series of steps very, very quickly, and it's really powerful.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think because we've only just started dabbling in it, I think the project world in particular is so ripe for this type of technology. And the reason I say that, and maybe you agree, one of them we talked about on the Horizon Scanning episode last year was around just resource scarcity and skill sets. So getting enough people on projects in enough time is always difficult, mobilization. And then getting the right information to the right people, the payload process is how do you get information from left to right, up and down, and then from site to office or office to site? We find that, will this expedite, I mean, which area do you think this will expedite or disrupt first? Do you think, because we see some of these products, and I know you're already tampering with Mplan, there's Nodes and Links, there's Alice, there's a few other tools out there that are playing in this space that were kind of ahead of their time, but are gaining momentum because of OpenAI. Which area do you think GPT or ChatGPT is going to disrupt first, or have the best or biggest benefit to projects?
Yeah, so I think maybe there are two areas. So I think it's all about individual use at the moment. So I think there's two speeds. So there's speed one, which is involving getting a lot more people slowly more comfortably involved in it, just within their own workflows and their own processes and their own learning. So often learning is a really good use case for this. And then there'll be, 5 or 10% of people on projects that will just be using it to do some of their jobs, 2 or 3 times more quickly. And so you've got those two speeds, and I think we need both of those, because otherwise, ultimately, it just won't work as companies together. I think there's one bit about this which is probably not always spoken. It's easy for me to speak about this because I think there's probably a lot of actually underground, if you like, ChatGPT use already. And actually, so it's not so much a question of it being new use, but I think people aren't yet comfortable sort of saying, yes, I used this on doing this. So I think a lot of it is just to get people comfortable with actually talking about it and saying, yeah, I did use that. And then it's much easier for everyone, because you really want to know if they've used it on a particular thing. But it's just like when email or whatever came first, or when we first had smartphones and things. There wasn't really a protocol for what you could and couldn't do, and how you could share it. So and that will actually make initially projects a lot safer, because there's a lot of shadow use going on probably. If we get it out on the table, then we can start to share and work out what the rules are, if you like, of engagement for this. So,
are there any good entry-level tools for people wanting to get into the use of ChatGPT? So, on the last pod, the Horizon Scanning, Dale and Val both talked about some statistics around usage of GPT and AI. More people than not, don't use it. I'm thinking a lot of the people that we've all worked, I think we all said we worked on the same rail project. The project run on Excel and fag packets and drawings. They just don't use it. So what would be the kind of entry level tool sets to get more adoption?
I mean, I think the learning is one. So I think people should just feel free to play with it. It would be great if people could give licenses out for ChatGPT Plus or ChatGPT Enterprise. But obviously that won't come straight away, because the GPT-4, which comes with ChatGPT Plus, is a much better model. I mean, yes, there are a lot of tools and a lot of education sets, but I think there's no substitute just for almost showing someone how to talk to it, and encouraging it just to ask. Initially it'll be silly questions, and a lot of it, I think you just start by asking things that you don't know. Start with that, and then what you find is once you get some answers to that, you don't know if they're true or not, right? Because you didn't know. So then people then start to ask in their own domain. They ask questions that they do know the answer to, and I think people have got different levels of curiosity about it, and I think there will be a neighbor effect. I think people will just start using it slowly. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the adoption of Excel, and it was both fast and slow, right? And there was still, I know at least one CEO that still doesn't know how to use Excel, right? Because she's such a brilliant communicator and such a brilliant leader that everyone's very happy to do all of that sort of stuff for her. So there will still be some people that don't ever need to use it. So I think it's more carrot than stick, really, and I think people will just copy what their neighbors do. So I think the big thing is it's a bit like allowing smartphones at work. Is that it's only when you get 5 or 10% of the company regularly using it, then at a certain point the company will need to come up with a policy, and from that point then it will just become people will just feel comfortable with it. But I don't know, Martin. I don't know what's the best one to. There's no substitute just for talking to it, really.
Well, there's another way, Lawrence. People can just follow you on LinkedIn and watch all of your videos, and they'll see all of the cool things that you can do with ChatGPT Plus. But before we go, I guess, too far down the rabbit hole, for those that have never used ChatGPT Plus, what are the key differences? Because you can all go and see, all right, this is what it says on the tin, but as a user, how much more do you get for your $20 a month?
Yeah. I was thinking about this today, actually. I mean, I'm not going to immediately answer your question and say that the funny thing about the $20 a month is I realize is if they tried to take it off me, I would be willing to pay, it's crazy, basically 2 orders of magnitude more for that product. And so they've chosen a price point because it's obviously a new product and that kind of thing. And I suspect it will increase. But obviously, by doing that, they've obviously in some ways done themselves a disservice, because people think it's £20 of value, and that's whatever it is, a Netflix and a Spotify subscription. Yeah. So the funny thing is that if they put it out at the £1,000 or the £2,000 mark, no one's going to be going for it. But actually, that's what I think it's worth. So why do I think that? Well, you basically get the latest model that's publicly available. Obviously, they've got models that they're working on, and at the moment that's 4.5 turbo. And the one that's not ChatGPT Plus, I mean, it's great to get started on. I think it's 3.5, but you once you've been talking to the thing for a few weeks, you just find you get much better answers, and it stays on track, right? It doesn't drift off.
Yeah.
So that's what you get. And to be honest, that's the main thing. You also get the ability to use these GPTs and that kind of thing. But I would always say to someone, just start with the basic one, and then the other thing I would say is just use. If you find you're using it a bit, try GPT 4.5. So pay for it, but you can pay for it for a month, right, and then cancel it, and just see what you're missing. And again, it's more about forward proofing. So it's more about when the next more powerful model comes out, you need to know what are the things that you're going to test on it straight away to see if it can do it, because it couldn't do it last time, but it could nearly do it, right? So, and if you're bold about it, you'll find that actually it can do a lot more things than the people that haven't even tried it actually think.
Yeah. No, it's really, really interesting.
There's in if you like theology, there's an idea of sort of God of the gaps, where if you like, so people will say that it will basically say, oh well, God can do this or God can't do that, etc., etc. And it's the same thing here, is that at the moment what people are saying is they're saying, oh well, it can't do this and it can't do that. But what you find is that actually over time these things are actually filling in very quickly. So so watch this space.
No, that's great. So let's try and go down a rabbit hole now. We've mentioned the differences between ChatGPT Plus and Turbo coming, in the pipeline. With Plus, you get what's called a GPT Builder, where you can build your own GPTs, which you've been doing plenty of. And we've just mentioned, Val and yourself have been talking about the store that, as of recording, will be unveiled next week, where anyone that's built a GPT can put their GPT on that store. What does this mean for everyone? Is it like an app store where people go and sell their apps? How do you see it changing the landscape in terms of having, public GPTs available to the public?
I mean, again, I actually think GPTs are kind of a transitionary stage. So I've jumped. I mean, they're wonderful, and I've jumped on them because that's the next stage of communicating and sharing this. But in a few months, there'll probably be something else. So you don't want to load all your stock into these. But it's a little bit like, I think what OpenAI wants is they want it to be a little bit of an app store moment, just so like there was for the iPhone. And so really what it is, it's a way of communicating and sharing and seeing what your friends are using. There are some revenue opportunities, but at the moment they're quite, obviously they haven't really sorted out the revenue model. So I think what they're doing at the moment is the really high value GPTs will get a share of OpenAI's revenues, which is quite something. But I'm guessing that's a 0.1% of a 1%. So I don't think that that's a motivator for most people. I think it would be a way of, again, just wrapping up use cases. I think that's what you can do is people that are a bit earlier with actually using these can wrap up a use case and sort of tie a bow on it, and then give it to them, sort of, if you like, give it to their friends and colleagues and say, use this for this. But like with all these things, just like with the App Store when it came out, I remember when it came out, you don't actually know how big these things will get. So again, let's just wait and see, right?
Yeah, no, let's wait and see. Val, I think there goes your retirement plan.
Yeah, well, I think as well we will get into the future of OpenAI. I think you're absolutely right. What it is doing is encouraging people, and I think everyday people, right, to be developers. The developer mindset is usually, it's restricted to engineers and coders. But if you could then take away the biggest resistance to developing, which is coding, then you've got this interesting platform for what's possible. And it's stating that then, and I think I said this once, Lawrence, is around the biggest commodity will be creativity and imagination on projects. I'm pretty much convinced that that's the only real thing that AI will have trouble with in the future. And arguably, it's getting pretty good at it if you look at Mid-Journey and some of the things that it's able to create, but it's still creating it from someone else's mind, right? So I think there is a massive opportunity for people who are super intelligent and experienced on projects, but also have a creative flair or an entrepreneurial flair to mix and mash these things, like kind of like in a chem lab where you go and you take one test tube of some liquid and another and you just combine them to see what happens. That's kind of how I see GPTs working. And for the ones that I have seen that have been shared, there is this almost like this free trade agreement between various individuals from around. And I think what you've done is even better. You've taken everything you wanted to test, Lawrence, with some courage and bravery, swallowed the pill of indifference and opinion, because LinkedIn and social media is one of those places, and you've put it up on the internet for everyone to see, regardless of opinion. You've just said, hey, this isn't necessarily a solution, but this is what I'm testing and this is the journey. Can you tell us about how that started so we can go down the rabbit hole a bit more around some of these use cases, Lawrence's? Because I think what you're doing is really important for that GPT leap, is for people to see other people doing it, and it builds momentum that way. Because even this limitation of imagination and projects, people are still using it to replace things like Word documents. They're using ChatGPT to fill in their PowerPoint presentations. They're kind of making it dumber rather than going, hang on, guys, that's kind of like trying to fit, a supercomputer in a fridge. Like, there's no point for that. Let's think bigger than that. So, Lawrence, over to you, mate, because I'm very interested in what you're doing online.
Thanks, Val. I think so. I think there was a book a couple of years ago by Julia Galef called The Scout Mindset. And there she's distinguishing between sometimes you need soldiers and sometimes you need scouts, and really a society needs both, and we need more or less of one or the other at different times. And I think so I think that the more we have a certain percentage of people that are willing to, if you like, scout forward and explore, then I think that will be important. I think partly because AI was so went through a winter, only started getting popular again in 2010, 11, and then so there's a lot of people that work very, very hard to build these incredible things, and they've been doing it in silence, if you like, for decades. And now they've hit the limelight, and they're quite rightly suddenly everyone's an AI expert and that kind of thing. So there's a problem there. Because it's 0.1% of the 0.01% of the working population and that kind of thing, and so there needs to be a way of having people that are keen on applying AI and learning how to use AI without sort of pretending to be AI engineers or AI product experts and that kind of thing. And I think people are quite rightly reticent to do that because they don't want to be sort of pretending to be something they're not, and I think that holds people back. So I think partly because I've come from a consulting background, and I've always been a beginner, if you like, in the different sectors. I've worked across a lot of different sectors. So I remember the time I first went in and did my first engineering sector thing, for example, when I've been doing a lot in transport and infrastructure, and so I'm used to sort of switching across and learning, and I think so it's easier for me to get started on it. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing, back to your point, Val, about actually the creativity. I think actually in terms of the people that we will attract potentially, if we were doing really well, the people that we want are people who are, if you like, people that love language, and people that actually what it means is it means that if you're an economist, or if you're a philosopher, or if you're an English literature graduate or something like that, it actually means that you may be better at many of these tasks because it's coming initially through language. But luckily, it's not excluding people because it's multimodal, and as new moods come along, let's say you're visual, right? Let's say then actually you can paint it a picture if you want it to do, and it will do it. So and then other modes will come. So soon another mode that not soon, but hopefully within a year or so, and there's already early models, there'll be tasks and actions, just like robot tasks and actions, and that's another modality. So maybe you'll be able to express it through dance, right, or whatever, and that kind of thing. So it really does mean that if, for example, you're really good at persuasion, or you're really good at painting a picture, then you'll probably be very good at actually sort of talking to these models. But also, if you're, and this is where, let's say you've got a services background, or you've got a project management background. If you're good, you'll probably be good, but in a different way. Because let's say you're good at giving orders, or a set of instructions, or defining a process. If you're actually good at giving a process, and you could give it a process, then you'll be very good at this. So there's a whole number of different ways in. And I think partly I'm just trying to show that it's almost like whatever you pick up, you can do. But I am excited by how much this is opening it up for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned communication there on projects. I'm kind of interested. How do you see the usage of ChatGPT enabling communication or between project teams? Because on the face of it, it seems like it's reducing it. And we all know the effect of communication is one of the big reasons for project failure. How do you kind of see that?
Yeah,
that linkage.
Two or three. It's a great question, Bonnie. I think it's two or three ways, right? So I think there's a short-term, immediate one, which is that substitution. So that as you get more time, because you've done the difficult bit of your job in the morning, because you've done it with ChatGPT, right? You've got time in the afternoon to sort of explore project ideas with your team, with your client, with your stakeholders. So that's hopefully a short-term effect. There's also then that other one that I was expressing just there, which is that it allows it will allow more people to come on board and express their full set of ideas, because depending on which modality you're best in, everyone's good at one of those, one or other of those modalities. So they will be able to, so paint a picture, right, and then say write a report that's the same as my picture, right? So suddenly, so if I'm quite, I like reading and writing. I'm not very visual, but they can communicate with me in a report format by putting a cartoon in, right? And then ChatGPT gets it and can turn it into sort of prose that I like. So that's another way. And then if you look a bit further ahead, look, one of the likely scenarios, right, is that if this takes off, and again, we might decide as societies that we don't want this and that kind of thing. But if you look a bit further ahead into this kind of these sort of agent frameworks, and one of the things that might happen is that essentially our agents, we except in person, mostly our agents talk to each other, right? So if I'm trying to sort of persuade Dale to sign off my project at a certain stage gate or whatever, then it in a sense, it's my agent that's actually communicating with Dale's agent. And if Dale's agent says, yeah, it's good enough to Dale, then he'll go for it. Now, I mean, that's a little further in the future, but that's probably what's coming. Now, there's a sense in which, if you know each other's preferences and that kind of thing, and your agent will know your preferences, right? And your thinking styles, it will know your biases, it will be able to correct your biases and that kind of thing. I'll give you one example. Okay. So for example, let's say you've got a work problem, and you might not be thinking straight about it. So you just say, this is my problem. This is what I'm thinking of doing about it. What do you think? And you put that in, and maybe typically you're too optimistic in a certain area or you're too pessimistic. ChatGPT hasn't got your bias. Now it does have other biases, but it's read these millions and millions of things, and so it will come up with something that might be blindingly obvious to your friend or your neighbor. It's like talking to your friend, but it can do that about anything, and so you can actually come up with a way forward on something which is correcting one of your blind spots. And so what that will do, Martin, is that helps with communication, because it means that there's less kind of sort of it's quicker to move on to the next thing, right, with your colleague, because actually let's say, for example, when you write, everyone hates what you write because you always write in a sarcastic tone, or whatever it is, right? Okay, you just rewrite this, but not sarcastic. Because I don't think I'm sarcastic, but everyone says I write sarcastic emails. So, and then there you go. Suddenly, you might find your relationships with people get better because it's just done a basic correction. So, so that's another way in which I think comms will change.
Yeah, awesome. I want to get into these use cases, Lawrence, because you've got a very structured way of producing them online, and I think you've got probably a wider blueprint in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And I think the last ones you kind of said you share them publicly. So if you've got the premium version, I'll just say this out loud. You share those links publicly so that people can actually see what you're doing and how you're doing it and what you're training on. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I've done.
Yeah.
I think I've done 4 now, which I've released. Sorry, go on.
No, that's great. So you want to go through them each one by one and what their intended purpose is?
Yeah, if I could remember, but I think broadly I just started out with. So I think that the most interesting one to start with is there's one that just basically creates scope and looks for dependencies based upon a project objective, and that's called Scopegoat. And then there's another one looking at project scenarios and trade-offs. To be honest, and then there's another one that looks at products for project management use cases. There's someone working on at the moment for portfolios, and I mean, people can look, but I think the main thing I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to show for whatever use case at whatever level in the organization and whatever inputs and outputs you can, if you know how to instruct someone, that's say an assistant project manager, to how to do it. Let's say you're doing, so one of the ones we're working on at the moment is portfolio optimization for projects. So if you know how to do it, then you just can actually write those instructions down and you can pop those in the GPT. So, and then the other wrinkle that I'm trying to do to show, again, to get people used to how these things are becoming agents, if you like. They're not agents yet, but to get sort of people used to it, I'm showing how you can cover all of the use cases in an organization at different stages of the life cycle. And I'm also showing how the outputs of one GPT can be the inputs of another. And really, it's not so that people, need or want to use my GPTs. It's to show that for whatever you're doing in your project, or whatever's the special thing that you can do, you can now actually sort of give that to someone else. I was talking to someone last night in the pub, and I actually right at the end, so that work didn't spoil the thing, but he'd not used ChatGPT, etc., whatever, and he's working with someone, with a client that's just getting started in program specification and understanding what a business case is and that kind of thing. And I showed him how I put in his project objective for him, and I could do it on my phone because there's you can't create GPTs on your phone, but you can, once you created it, it will run code for you in the app if you wanted to. So it will generate graphs and everything. So we put in his project objective for the particular use case, and I basically asked it to generate scenarios and also create the different dimensions of what trade-off decisions would need to be made in the business case. So, cost against benefits, against safety, against feasibility, et cetera, et cetera. And it just ran all the graphs. So that's because I know how to write business cases and I know how to do the analysis of it as well. So if you've got a 25-year-old that's like that, it's just getting started, right? You can just get them across that first bit by going, well, they don't need to do it in the GPT. It just gets them unstuck because they can put their particular thing in and they can get moving very straight away.
Yeah, that's a great point and it's very impressive for people who haven't seen it before. If you could just pull out your phone and lo and behold, boom, it's done in a couple of minutes. I mean, you would expect, right? When we would expect one of the benefits should be efficiency on projects, right? Where, all of these transactional pieces of work or some of the scaffolding or establishment of various things should not be a problem for the future. It should, even now, even without agents, Lawrence, we can still say GPTs can do a lot of the laborious stuff that you'd probably get a grad or an intern in to do, template writing or whatever it might be, or establishing some basic ground rules. I mean, I use something similar for a project management plan, where, as you would know, a lot of the project management plan is just setting out the instructions and setting out the hows and the whys and the whats. But a lot of that information is pulled from other documents, so you can feed it. And that probably leads into my next question around, where the real advantage is for GPT and maybe just ChatGPT in general, might not be around the generic, and this is the value for projects. It can be trained on the specific. And so some of your business cases are obviously around project lifecycle, but you mentioned one specifically there, which is a bit more tailored. What's your experience around using ChatGPT for tailored or trained information that you've uploaded yourself for those GPTs? Have you used that?
Yeah. So are you talking about GPTs here rather than ChatGPT, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
Obviously, you could do it in either and both. Yeah. So in the GPTs, as you know, you can run code. You can ask the GPT to run code, which means you can create visuals and tables, etc. You can also get it to read documents that you get in. You can get it to read Excel documents, etc. And so you can put in project frameworks or whatever you like, really. As long as you're thinking about actually privacy and security concerns, you can do that. And that can be very powerful because up to now, until a month or two ago, we would have to use something called RAG, which was retrieval augmented generation, to do that, because you could only fit so much in the context window. But now they've made that very easy to do that without you, and you can still do this. Don't worry about the RAG thing if you've not heard about it, but that was what we were having to do until a month or two ago, and that's still quite powerful. But now this is something you can literally create a GPT in 20 minutes. It wouldn't be very good if you do it created in 20 minutes. What you'll find is a lot of the GPTs some people have just uploaded documents and they're using that just to kind of sort of, do guided search on those documents. And that's interesting, but I mean, in my opinion, that's not the best use of GPTs. If you want it to follow a set of instructions, and in a project use case, that's often the case. What you want to do is you want to make sure that in the instructions you give the GPT, you essentially write a series of steps along with a style and an approach, and possibly a persona in that. And then, so for example, if let's say you want to run it through a series of stage gates, don't just upload your project framework, your 200-page thing, and say, because it won't work, right? Because it will be able to look it up. But what you need to do is like tell it how you as a project manager would use that document when you are actually running through the stage gates. So you would say, well, first I would go to this section and I would set up the stage gate review, and then it knows how to go to and use those documents. So it's, if you like, instructions first, and then the documents are, if you like, give it more context. But don't make the mistake of just uploading a document, unless you just want to use that as guided search, which is a useful thing, but it's not really using it to its full potential.
Now, Lawrence, if I jump in there, I find it fascinating. You're clearly having a lot of fun building these GPTs as well. And you mentioned a bit of, you can add your own code and all of that type of thing. So for the uninitiated, have you ever used ChatGPT to give you the code you need to build the GPT? I mean, because there is a way to say, actually, can you help me build a GPT using itself? And
Exactly.
how accurate, useful is that circular sort of,
Yeah. So it's good to know. So the reason why it's useful to like maybe know someone that knows a bit of code, but you don't need to be a coder yourself or a developer. What it's good for is knowing the kind of things that code could do for you. Okay, so it's like for example, maybe you're not brilliant at Power BI, even though a lot of people are. It's more like knowing what would you use Power BI for, right? Or so in this case is knowing that there are, and in fact, I've got a GPT that does this, which is the project product, which allows you to see for a particular use case which code libraries are useful to you. But that shouldn't put you off because you don't need to be able to code. It's nice to be able to code, but you don't need to be able to code to get started. You need to be able to ask questions that it can answer. So let me. I was talking about project portfolios as a GPT example, right? So let's use that. So I know different ways of doing portfolio prioritization. There's for example, there's a search technique called A-star search, and then there's something that finance uses, which is like doing efficient portfolio frontiers and that sort of thing. And both of those, you can do those with code quite straightforwardly because they're both algorithms. Okay. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of actually. I never built an app that does one or the other, but I know what it does. I know how it does it, and so I can then when I construct a GPT, I say use the following algorithm to prioritize this particular portfolio, and I also know what the inputs it needs, and I know what the outputs I would expect. So you don't need. So you're absolutely right, Dale, that you can actually go away and actually learn how to use the code just in the Chat GPT and then go across. But in a certain sense, it's even easier than that. You just if you know that so for example, sort of Python. If you think of the main Python libraries, you just need to know like the 4 or 5 main ones and what they do. Okay, so like scikit-learn runs basic machine learning, for example. Like sort of NumPy allows you to sort of work with sort of different dimensions, matrices and those kind of things. And there's we could go through a few, but that's the kind of level you need to know. And you don't even need to know that, right? Because it will try to do it for you, even if you don't know the code library. If you're getting more involved, then actually what you're saying, Dad, is actually what I do. So all my GPTs actually start with a one-to-one ChatGPT session, and only once I know how to do it in the ChatGPT, I can just move it across into the GPT. But you can just do it straight in the GPT. But if you're trying to do something quite involved, then the GPTs are great because they like package it up, but you should often just go to ChatGPT and have a session, because you've then got, if you like, the power of the full model. So I think you sort of use both. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I could move on to GPT so quickly, like the week they came out, was because I'd spent several months like prompting. Well, I spent a year prompting. So essentially testing prompts every day with the core model, and I'd spent a couple of months like posting those. So I already had the material to then start populating GPTs. So I think I would encourage people to get started now because you've only missed a year, right? So you're still really, really early, but you have missed a year, right? So it's just get someone to get you started. I mean, and they can just sit with you just 5 minutes and ask it a stupid question and then ask it a hard question, and then laugh at it, right? But then write that question down and then ask it again in 3 months' time, and I think you'll be surprised. So yeah. get started is what I would say.
So sounds like a fun exercise for someone. One question about GPTs. When you're working with them, is it better to provide it the solution or what you're trying to get at, or provide the problem?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Yeah, so what I would do, so what and this is what I tend to do. I tend to ask straight out what I want. So what I give it the problem, and I say what I want out of it, and I don't give it the solution, right? But sometimes those are really quite hard, because I essentially say, like, set up a whole project for me. So I will sometimes be doing that, and I kind of know it won't manage it all, but I always start with the hardest question, and the reason for that is because it is improving so much, and it will often is that you'll miss out if you start to ask it the smaller questions further down. So if it doesn't successfully do the whole thing straight away, you can then start to say, well, have you thought about using this for it, etc., etc., and then you essentially become a collaborator with it. And you go, oh, could you try that, or could you try this? Just like you would like workshopping it. And you can use these literally as whiteboard sessions, right? So I sometimes, so you have a colleague in there, right? So you can have 2 or 3 of you in there, as well as the Chat GPT. But you can try different things, and you can run through a whole series of possible solutions in half an hour. And you can even whiteboard, in the sense that you can say, oh yeah, I like that idea. Can you draw me that as a graph in the thing? And it would draw you a graph of like what it's saying, just like it would draw on a whiteboard. Or you could sketch one, right? And then you could take a picture of it and say, that's what I'm thinking. How about that? And it will. So it really is like a whiteboard session with it. So start with the problem and the outcome that you want, and expect it to fail 50% of the time. But 50% of the time, you'll be really nicely surprised. And the real secret for me of this is that it's not about this year. It's about learning. This is like really new for all of us. So it's not even about project management. It's about, like, we've got this new capability, and it's like exciting and scary, and we don't understand it. It's like suddenly if your cat started to speak, right? It's like, well, what would you do? So, and basically, with silicon is starting to speak to us, right? So, like, sand is starting to speak to us. So it's like, well, what are you going to do about that? Well, let's talk to it and find out what it can do and what it can't do, because anything that you do this year won't really matter, but it will mean that the stuff that you do next year and the year after, and you'll be ambitious enough for it. And also, you'll start to see, both at a community and a society level, and at a project level, you'll start to understand what are the safeguards and the guide rails that you need to make sure that the thing actually does what you want it to do, because it's powerful, and therefore it's scary. So if you do it now while it's like young, right, when it's not too scary, then you won't be so worried about it, and actually you will know when if it does get scary in a year or two, then at least you'll know, oh, hang on a minute, this is actually quite scary, and I actually want it to put it in guardrails, right? So it's more about, like, it's about, this is a new type of conversation that we've never had before. So learn, how are you going to respond to it? It's like, if your cat's speaking to you, what are you going to do about it? Well, talk to it and find out what it wants, right?
Exactly. You've left him speechless. I think Martin's got one follow-up. Martin?
No, go for it, Val. I was trying to process that answer.
I'm sorry about talking about cats, but
yeah, I think that's what's thrown him off, Lawrence. But look, I think we are definitely moving into. It's a great segue into the future of what's possible, because we do know that, as you said, I think earlier on, Lawrence, that the GPT is really just a stepping stone, and I think, as you said, We know that OpenAI is testing the market, and obviously their major contributor is Microsoft, or one of their major contributors. And for those that don't know, Microsoft has embedded that product into their platform. It's called Copilot. I think they do have that out. I don't know if it's mainstream yet, but I don't know if you've had a play with that yet, Lawrence. But obviously, with a platform like that, and the fact that most businesses, particularly projects, use some form of Microsoft, whether for good or bad or indifferent, I don't know. But if everything was almost turned on and it had this assistant or co-pilot in the background, if we start with Microsoft and where they think they're going, maybe that'll tell us where the market's going. But what's your view on Copilot, ChatGPT's embedded kind of infrastructure there, and how that might be used practically? And then we can go straight into the future from there.
Yeah, I think the co-pilots are really good to use, and they're just going to get better and better and better. And obviously, if you could, like you were talking about NPlan earlier, so NPlan is an example of a software service that is actually providing a co-pilot for you to sort of drive sort of risk software, but drive it with a large language model. So everyone will be doing it. So I think you want to be doing that with everything that you, with all the things that you regularly use. You want to be using that Copilot feature. There's even going to be an AI button, I think, with the Microsoft keyboard and that kind of thing. So you want to be using that. But I think you also want to be using just like learning the capabilities of the best models. And to be honest, like at the moment, sort of GPT Turbo is up there. There's an ELO rating system that like what they use for chess. There's a whole number of different rating systems, but it might not be ChatGPT for much longer and that kind of thing. And so you want to be, for example, there's the all of the Bard ones that have come out, etc. But you just want to be using one of those in a general application as well as the co-pilots, because the co-pilots sort of are about a different way of you want to use it in the co-pilot mode, but you also want to use it in what you were saying, Val, which is that creative open-ended mode, where it's easier if you're not actually stuck in a particular app doing a particular thing. So if you're thinking about a new way of delivering your project, I wouldn't do that in Copilot when you're sitting on PowerPoint. I would do that in an open-ended conversation with ChatGPT. A, because it's a better model, but B, because you'll be thinking in a PowerPointy type way. So I think use both. So for me, I think we've been through this in about a year, and I think starting to think about actually sort of what's coming. And I think everything that you were saying in your last podcast was absolutely bang on, because we're all, this is one where we're talking about AI and talking about ChatGPT, but you have to think about the economics of the market. You have to think about leadership and teamwork and culture. So there's all of that as well. But I think I'm not really hearing enough, with the exception of you guys and one or two others in the project community that's really engaging with what this will look like in a year's time and in 2 years' time. So I mean, over Christmas I was thinking, and so for me, there's the way I would frame it right now. This will change in 3 months, but I would frame it as being that I think there's a project flywheel that's likely to start moving. And is already moving, that will drive business outcomes. So sort of stepping back, big picture, right? So there's a data constraint that gets removed. There's a democratization that will happen. And there's a change in the capabilities that we'll value in human project managers. All right. And it's going to be a flywheel. So let me explain, if I can briefly. So everyone's been saying in the project community, or a lot of people have been saying rightly, that we need the right data to get the right AI outcomes and that kind of thing. And that's true, but it's a lot less true, and it's becoming less true in many ways, because we're starting to get to the point where if you provide enough local context to the AI, local data about the particular thing that you're trying to do, then it has enough general knowledge, if you like, to bootstrap an effective solution to what you're doing. So actually, there's a data constraint. There's a data constraint that's being removed. Okay. And what that does is that increases the democratization of projects. And what I mean by that is a much broader section of people can and will be running projects. And that change, and those projects will come at much greater and lesser scales, and there'll be much more choice about that. And then that democratization in turn changes what we want from our project managers. It changes the capabilities of human project managers that we'll value, which taps into what you were saying, Val, about creativity and imagination, because those other 2 points, in some ways, implementation of a project will be more of a no-brainer. That will be more or less in the bag. All right, I'm looking forward a little bit, but not that far. Okay, so what we will need people for is to work out which projects get done, and to actually that will become, so that's a people thing. That's a what is it we want these things to do, and let's have those conversations, and let's work out where are the conflicts, and actually my GPT does this and your GPT does that, but it becomes a flywheel, because as those 3 things happen, and as projects start to get done in this new paradigm where they actually do a lot of the implementation, the AI does a lot of the implementation of the projects, then there's more data that has been on project success, and there'll be some project failures. There'll be more data for how projects get done in this new paradigm, which is the data you really want, right? Do you really want to know how projects were done 15 years ago or 20 years, 25 years ago with draft boards and things like that? Yes and no, right? So it's a flywheel, because then there's more data of actually AIs being successful in doing that with humans, which will increase the success rate of projects being done through AI. And I think there's a flywheel effect. So that's where I really see things going at the moment. And again, that's probably going to change in 3 months, but I think we need to zoom out a bit, just like you were in the last episode, to see where this is going.
I love that, Lawrence, and I'm 100% with you. We can't speculate, because again, the speed at which this is happening relatively, because it's hit critical mass, even though a lot of people accept the term AI, but not many people have swallowed the pill and actually taken it to, I'm going to start driving the AI cars yet. But they are very curious. They're in a state of curiosity. And I think the stuff that you're doing, Lawrence, really helps broaden the imagination. I think it's also good to just, clip on the peripherals for people who are listening to us, who are thinking about having to try. There is no cost of impact to trying ChatGPT tomorrow, today, getting in there, loading up some interesting documentation. And we found, we talked about this before, Dale, with institution information or project management best practices. If you want to load something up and see how it works, work out the functions. And I'm big on failing fast and failing forward. So I think what you're doing is effectively finding those, I guess, barriers, or where it collapses, or where it goes a bit silly and hallucinates, or gives you something gibberish back. You still have to have that technical knowledge, though. It doesn't displace the people of being experienced on projects. It doesn't do that. What it does is it gives you another tool set effectively for your belt, and you can say, actually, you know what, instead of sitting there writing all these reports, I can press a button, get an agent to execute all of this for me. I just need to know what to look for if it's wrong. And that still requires experience, but I think there is a lot of framework for that. And I would love to add to your data constraint, because I think the data piece is absolutely fundamental. And what it actually does is it distributes power. And I do think we're going to get a bit of pushback from the industry, because it means we're going to have to tell the truth on projects. And I think, personally, calling out most mega projects that I've ever been on is people get nervous when you start telling the truth, because the truth isn't always, lovely. And you see this on project blowouts, where everyone's waiting to the last minute before they actually go and say, you know what, we're in the red, we're in the shit, and there's a $20 billion blowout. Now, that's not because everyone on projects knows. The inside joke is we already knew. Anyone on the PMO on the project control said we knew a year ago. So it's very difficult for, I guess, a lot of leaders to swallow the pill of letting go of the control. And that's going to be the biggest shift, I think, in people. But the additional constraint I was going to talk about is time. The synapse of time is an interesting one because, when it comes to projects don't run projects. Contracts do. And we would love projects to just run on business rules based on planning, risk, cost, etc., because it'd be a lot easier and a lot more fun. But contracts is really how these things work. So this time displacement, what happens is there's a contract complaint or conflict, and people go away with actions, and then something happens, and there's a time delay of a month, 2 months, 3 months. There's a commercial refresh or something similar to that effect. That won't need to happen anymore. So we'll actually collapse the time barrier because you'll have on hand this retrieve and recall functionality, which, as humans, we can retain some information, but we can't retain a lot. So if ChatGPT is in the room listening to the conversation, says, hold on a second, Lawrence, actually, subclause A or clause Z, there's always a clause Z, right? Clause Z says, you're like, oh, shit. So there's an honesty pill that I think with a lot of this stuff that people are going to have to swallow. And I think that's the two dynamics that I think are going to be very liberating for projects, the data constraint and the time constraint, the thing to do things, because we're not going to have to walk away and do actions anymore. We're actually going to be able to do that in the rooms that we're sitting in real time, rather than waiting for another month end to come through. But I want to get Dale and Martin in on this because I know we've been talking about it, Lawrence, but everyone on this pod works in projects. So Dale, I might go to you first, mate, and just throwing the project questions back to you. The future of this ChatGPT or this Gen AI work on projects, what do you think?
So I think the jury is still out. I don't think anyone truly knows, but I saw an interesting post the other day from someone that's put their head above the parapet and said, these are my predictions. And one of the things we spoke about, I know, thank you very much for referring to the last one, Lawrence, on Val and I, horizon scanning. But one of the things we noticed was that there's a slow adoption rate, and we've spoken about it briefly on this episode as well. And one of those barriers might be that people aren't necessarily that comfortable typing with a chatbot. Most people. We are, but we're in an echo chamber. But broadly speaking, maybe most people aren't used to sitting on their phone or in front of a computer and chatting to a screen. And the prediction I saw was that it would change, the interface would change from a chatbot to a voice, simply because that's more familiar with human beings. And maybe there's some truth in that, because a lot more people interact with Siri and Alexa and, the voice assistant. So maybe, and they've been around a lot longer, and they're in our households, they're in our pockets. So maybe that will break down the barrier to adoption in projects as well, because Val has a point there in going, actually, if you had this in a room as a virtual assistant talking to you and listening to you, very much more human-like than sitting and typing, maybe that breaks down the barrier, and maybe that's one for the future. So that's something that's been in my mind lately, Val. I don't know if that answers your question, but let's go to Martin, because Martin, you must have some views on what this year might hold.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think we sort of mentioned it before. I just think that the adoption rate is going to be slower than probably what we firstly want and what we probably think. Going back to some of the early episodes of this podcast 5 years ago now, people were saying this stuff's going to happen in 2 or 3 years' time, and it's still not really there yet. I think 99% of the people on projects probably are nearer to my understanding of AI than probably the three of yous. And I just think because of that and the maybe reluctance, just ignorance, let's be frank, I just think it will be slower than what we probably hope. Maybe the 5 years that you mentioned there earlier, Lawrence. But I think, just use it. Like ChatGPT is absolutely fantastic as a tool. The free version's great, and you've already mentioned how much better the paid version is. But I'm not sure if that answers your question, Dale. But we can build the hope and the aspiration. I think that's what we want, is getting a good word out there.
No, it does. I actually thought next time, Lawrence, we'll get ChatGPT in on the podcast with you, and we'll see how that goes, and we'll do an interview podcast with ChatGPT on the call, just to make it real for everybody. But I do think like
You're
there
just
is
setting
this.
me up there.
I'm setting myself up actually, so watch out. But I do think it's waiting for this thing I call the iPhone moment, right? Where the intuitiveness of the interface, right? The experience, the human experience of whatever they're interfacing with is so easy to use that it becomes the no-brainer. And you'll get to that point. It'll get to that point at some point. We don't even know what that looks like. As you said, Lawrence, quite rightly, we don't actually know what that would be. I think Martin was mentioning before this movie, Her, with Joaquin Phoenix in it, where he's just got an earplug and the AI is just organizing his entire world. If you haven't seen that movie, it's pretty good. It gets a bit strange by the end, but it's plausible. Very similar to some of the Black Mirror episodes. And I think one of the things that we haven't really mentioned is around ethics of AI and the appropriateness of use. And I think at the moment, it is treated as a bit of a black magic box because people are using it to do some of their day job. And then I think some people are kind of getting not revealed, but like they go, oh, well, you did this with ChatGPT because it's an American spelling, and you can kind of pick up if someone's right. So if someone doesn't know a particular subject matter and they write a project management plan or something, technical, maybe a business case, you can definitely, as someone who's educated and experienced, you'll definitely pick it up. You were like, you ChatGPT'd this. So it's kind of giving it a bit of a negative rep. And there's a lot of schools and institutions and universities that have actually stopped students from utilizing ChatGPT. And I was going to ask you about the LMS side, the learning management side of things in L&D, because if universities are blocking this, and I don't think this is, so I'm on the fence of this is a bad idea to block something, because all it does is make people want to use it more. It doesn't actually stop it. And I don't think we can stop it, especially with the younger kids, because they just are innately fused in with computers, right? They've had it since birth. iPads and iPhones have just been a way of life. Social media is just a way of life. How do you see this area of education ethics? Do we need to control AI once it is kind of mainstream and everyone's using it? The Martin C's of the world are using it every day. Or is it going to self-manage?
Yeah, no, there's definitely an alignment and a control issue that as a society we need to sort out. I think we haven't got time for that today. I did hear, I listened to your excellent conversation back in May, actually, on the ethics of AI, and I think that's due for a refresh. But I think that's a good introduction for your other listeners as well, because I really enjoyed that. Also, education, I haven't really, I'm not qualified to speak about that, but I agree with you that those are questions I'm asking as well. So what I could do, Val, is just what you've been saying, the three is very interesting. I think, so Martin, you were talking about the difference of adoption. And I think I agree with you. I think in some ways that won't matter, and I agree that will happen, but I think that's going to be an exaggeration of what's already happening anyway, where there are a few papers where you see that actually a lot of the profit and the success and actually delivery of GDP across different countries in the last 20 years have actually been from several big firms. So you've got 80% of firms are kind of struggling along and a little bit above and a little bit below, zero. And then you've got the 20% or 10% that are actually going gangbusters. And I think there's going to be a similar thing here where a lot of people won't use it and adopt it. But I think that I suspect that the efficacy of these things, especially as they even in the next year or so, will just mean that people will just notice. But I think, unfortunately, I think it does need to happen. So I think new companies will spring up. A few old companies will die, etc., etc. Just as is always happening. But yeah, I do think that actually what you're saying will happen. But I think that actually the progress will continue. Dale, on your one, you were talking about the form factor, if you like, of how we speak to these. And
yep.
Have you used it in the speech whisper format? I don't know if you've tried it, but
no,
I would try that.
Okay.
So what you do is is just download the app, and then you can click on a button that's got a headphones button.
Yeah.
And you can basically continue a conversation that you were having earlier. And like I do it when
on
I'm
the app,
walking around.
on the phone.
Yeah.
I've used that one. Sorry, I thought you meant on the computer. Yeah, I've used that. Yeah, it's
Okay.
really cool.
Yeah. So I think So I think that actually that absolutely, I think a lot of us would rather do that. And Val, on your point about sort of honesty and transparency, I think you're bang on. I think what you say though indicates that there are there's a whole number of possible futures, but there's two different types of future, right? One where you're because it could get handled in different ways. Because if you're in a big company and if you like, there's one enterprise ChatGPT model, if you like, that's fine tuned for that company, and it kind of aggregates everything, a sort of HAL for that company. Then I think what you're saying is absolutely right. But I think there's also in a lot of companies and in the ecosystem of suppliers and tier ones that we have, you've got another parallel kind of possibility, which is that it's back to what I was saying about that. My agent talks to your agent, i.e., my large language model talks to yours, and at least at the moment, back to your AI ethics issue, is you can get the thing to lie, right? You can get it to go in persuasion mode, and so my AI can persuade your AI, and it may not be averse to like sort of telling a few porkies. So there is that much more. So there is, if you like, a centralized version of this world, and there's a decentralized version of this world. And the centralized version of the world is kind of scary and not scary at the same time. And the decentralized world is scary and not scary in a different way. So, and probably the reality is that there'll be different parts of business that evolve in a centralized way, and other parts of the market will evolve in another way. Who knows? But I think you're pointing to something that we need to watch closely. But unfortunately, I don't think it means that transparency and accuracy of projects is guaranteed. But I think you've raised some really interesting points, the three of you.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think, Lawrence, I think we've all worked on projects enough, or just have lived long enough to know that nothing in life is guaranteed. And I love the fact that we've just opened another can of worms. It gives us a real good segue to bring you back for a follow-up episode. But before we let you go, we're going to resurrect something that we haven't done in a while called Fiverr.
Okay.
It's 5 quick-fire questions, and for this, I will bring in Machine Gun Martin.
Yep. So 5 quick-fire questions. Let's give it a go. Number 1, biggest misconception about AI.
That if we ignore it, it will go away.
Number 2, what's your book recommendation to our listeners?
I'll tell you I'll answer a slightly different question, which was the book that got me started on all this was it's a bit out of date now because it was 2016, which is a long time ago in AI world, but it's called The Master Algorithm. It's still a good book. It's by Pedro Domingos, and basically in it sets out the 5 different families of machine learning and AI. And then actually a lot of what I'm talking about this suggestion of you having your own personal agents and that kind of thing, that was what he was talking. That meant that I was looking out for that from 2016, and I'm amazed to find that we're actually here. Just by the way, just one quick thing on that book, which is why it's worth like sort of spending half an hour with it, is one of the things he suggests is that those families of models, one of the master algorithm that will actually maybe be the general AI, may be an ensemble of models, right? So that you get the strengths and the weaknesses of all, and they'll essentially vote. But yeah, so that book.
Nice one. Number 3, are leaders born or made?
Definitely, they're made. So
interesting. If you were stuck in a lift with 3 people, who would you want them to be?
3 small people. So yeah, with great table manners. So who would that be? It'd be the 3 of you guys. Come on.
Aww.
There we go.
Flattery will get you
Maybe not
everywhere.
small, but right. So,
All right, let's finish. Controversial. Yes or no? Will AI affect the US and UK elections in 2024?
well, yeah. How can it not, right? So sadly, I mean, hopefully it won't swing it. I mean, that really would be bad. But yeah, we need to keep talking about this as a society because it's a big issue.
Oh, fantastic stuff, Lawrence Rowland. Thank you so much for being such an amazing sport, sharing openly and candidly your views, your opinions, and what you're doing. I think you've certainly intrigued us. It's a fantastic way to kick off this new year, new season with this episode. So we really, really thank you for your time.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Before we let you go, any final thoughts that you want to leave the listeners with?
Can I just paint like one possible path forward briefly? It just sort of take me a minute. Would that be all right, Dale?
Yeah, sure.
Right. So if you remember what I was saying about sort of a flywheel effect, so sort of a data constraint which leads to more democratization, which leads to a change in actually what we value in project managers. So I think some of this will play out this year. So what to look for, right? So the models at the moment are multimodal. Okay. So in a few months, so the data constraint, right? So specifically, one of the things that's going to come soon in the next few months is video, right? So as soon as your ChatGPT allows video, okay, what are you going to do on day 2? Right, well, I'll tell you, right? If you're a senior project manager, day 2, you switch on your screen share at 8 o'clock in the morning and you record your whole day, right? And if people will allow it, let them sort of do the meetings, but the emails you send, the dashboards you look at, the decisions you make, right? Switch that off, right? Upload that to ChatGPT and say that's how I run my projects, that's how I run my portfolio, right? Day 3, you say to ChatGPT, I'm off now, I'm off traveling today, so you're in charge, right? So please do what you can. Things you can't do, just pile them up and revert them to me the next day, right? So that's what I'm saying about a data constraint removing. So actually, because it's a video, then suddenly you're able to get into time and process and workflow. You'll be able to understand how you make decisions, right? Very briefly, right? What that then does is that means that projects can get delivered more quickly, even this year. Right. What does that do for project democratization? Right. If you're a project services company, right, let's say you've got you run typically 10 projects of $1 million each, 10 million. Okay. Next door, you might have a project services company that opens up, right, that's still 10 million market cap, but it's running 100 projects, but they're only £100,000 each. And it's doing that with 100 GPTs, right? But it's doing it with 10 people. Okay, so like one person looks after 10 projects with 10 GPTs, right? Okay, and then what's the next thing? Well, you've got all these different projects that are spinning up that people are doing. And so it's changing again that the best project managers in those two companies will be talking to each other, and you're talking to the market and talking to the community saying, well, look, this is what we're building. Is that conflicting with any of the things you're building? And like, what can we do about that? How can we collaborate on this, etc.? So those are the project management skills that will be important. And then the last bit, the flywheel bit, right, is let's say by the end of the year, you've been 60% successful on those projects, run with those GPTs. I'm perfectly serious, by the way. Then actually you've got data, you've got fine-grained data on actually how those things will run, and you've got 60% successful projects, 40% unsuccessful. Those go into the AI, right, and its implementation rate will improve, right? So it's a business flywheel, and I think it doesn't matter if I'm just giving you one possible path, but I'm saying we need to be having these conversations because I think people. Well, maybe there's a lot of conversations going on I'm not aware of, but I think sort of a lot of the medium-sized companies sort of we need to understand actually how this is going to impact our businesses because these sort of firms are coming. So anyway, so thank you for letting me sort of share that.
Wow, what a way to end the pod. I don't know if you're going to follow up on that or not, Val, because that's an amazing thought to leave everyone with. Give it a go.
Well, I think Lawrence is absolutely right, and the flywheel I think will also dislodge itself from the desktop. So at the moment, we consider ChatGPT as something that is desktop or mobile prone. But what is actually going to happen, and you can see Tesla with their humanoid robots, will be able to go and verify things on site without being on site. So that agent model will actually transverse to anyone in the world being able to actualize any project in the world without being there physically. And I think that will be very, very interesting. I'll probably mention as well, it's probably a good time to get shares in data centers and CPU chips and silicon and all of those things, because they're going to be heavily needed in that kind of market. But very, very exciting, Lawrence. Looking forward to it.
And very briefly, Val, on what you're saying, so that's another mode that's coming, right? So it's come from robotics. It's just like we're saying, video's coming. Another mode, there are already early models out there, but it's probably coming to the mainline ones in the next sort of 6 to 18 months, is the mode of tasks and actions, that the thing can understand those, and it can turn from visuals to text to task and actions and back. Right, and that really is then affecting the physical world. So absolutely bang on, Val.
That's when
lots to ponder.
Happens, Dale.
Absolutely. No, we'll have some ethics governance protocols around it. I hope. But anyway, let's see what that brings. Like I say, Lawrence Rowland, thank you so much for being an amazing guest on this episode. That is it, folks. That is the end of this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've had a good start to the new year when you listen to this as well. Make sure you are using and being curious with ChatGPT, Bard, whichever one you want to use. Reach out to Lawrence as well. He's always available to guide you the right way. But thank you to our guest on this episode, Lawrence Rowland, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.